The first red flag was not the security guard giving me that apologetic, tight-lipped nod like I had just walked into my own funeral. It was not even my identification badge going dead in my hand, refusing to beep when I pressed the rectangular plastic card against the electronic scanner of the heavy glass double doors. No, the real blow came when I opened the door to my own laboratory and found a stranger sitting at my mahogany desk, feet kicked up on the corner of the polished wood, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug that my research team had gifted me on my last birthday. The scent of chemical solvents, sterile culture media, and lysing agent hung in the air, but the atmosphere felt entirely alien, cold, and clinical. The chemical smell of 99% isopropyl alcohol and the dull, rhythmic vibration of the high-speed floor centrifuges had been my constant companions for half a decade. Every morning, I would walk past the reception counter, breathing in that clean, synthetic air and feeling a sense of absolute purpose. This laboratory was my sanctuary, where I translated complex biological theory into tangible results. I had spent countless nights watching the fluorescent green proteins band under ultraviolet light, verifying that our lipid nanoparticles were indeed encapsulating the therapeutic payload correctly. When we first started in that cold warehouse, we did not have heating during the winter, and my hands would shake as I tried to perform micropipetting. Trevor would be out on phone calls, promising investors that we were on the verge of curing cancer, while I was trying to keep our cell lines from dying in the incubator. It was a partnership born of necessity, but as the funding grew, Trevor's visits to the lab became rare, replaced by meetings in high-rise offices with men who wore silk ties and spoke about capital efficiency and exit strategies. The man did not even wait for me to cross the threshold before he looked up, grinned with all the warmth of a corporate liquidator, and spoke. "You must be Daniel," he said, his voice dripping with smooth, calculated condescension that instantly set my teeth on edge. "I am Gregory Vance, the new director of innovation." I blinked, standing there in my white laboratory coat, holding a metal tray of freshly prepared culture dishes. The new director of innovation? 3 months ago, I was the one running this entire facility. My name was on the office door, on the federal patent applications, and on the payroll allocations. I was the senior biochemist who had built the viral delivery vector that kept this startup afloat when our Series B funding round looked like an absolute disaster on Sand Hill Road. I had poured 5 years of 80-hour work weeks, missed family holidays, and cold takeout dinners into this concrete bunker of pipettes, bioreactors, and liquid nitrogen tanks. And now Gregory Vance, with his dry, clean button-down shirt, gold watch, and mediocre designer cologne, was sitting in my chair like he had owned it for a decade. The technical challenge of the vector had taken me 2 full years to solve. The human immune system is incredibly efficient at destroying foreign viral particles before they can deliver their genetic instructions to target tissues. I had designed a custom envelope protein with specific glycoprotein ligands that mimicked the host cell's own markers, essentially tricking the tumors into importing our synthetic messenger, ribonucleic acid. Without this specific ligand array, the delivery system was useless, a highly expensive injection of useless lipids that the liver would filter out in minutes. I had spent 48 consecutive hours in the laboratory during our final validation trial, barely sleeping, drinking lukewarm coffee, and checking the fluorescence microplate reader every 20 minutes to ensure the transfection efficiency was holding. That was the moment of discovery, the breakthrough that Trevor used to secure our $15 million Series B round. He stood on stage talking about our revolutionary technology, while I sat in the audience, my clothes smelling of autoclave steam and my eyes heavy with exhaustion. He stood up with theatrical pity, brushing a speck of dust off his trousers, and pulled a thick manila envelope from my desk drawer. "Human resources wanted to handle this with more formality," he said, "but I figured it would be more efficient to handle it directly. Welcome back from your short medical leave. Consider yourself already replaced." Inside the envelope were my termination papers. The signature lines were flagged with bright yellow sticky notes, and the severance clauses were pre-filled with an insulting figure. It was the kind of lowball offer you present to someone you assume is too exhausted and broken to fight back. The terms demanded that I sign away all future claims, release the company from all liability, and leave the property immediately without speaking to my team. I did not yell. I did not slam the door. I simply smiled, grabbed a cheap ballpoint pen from the desk organizer, and walked out to the reception desk. I did not sign the termination form. Instead, I signed the guest visitor log on the counter, returned my dead badge to the security officer, and asked if I required an escort to the parking lot. The guard did not say a word, just buzzed me through the exit gates with a look of pure embarrassment. I drove home with that manila envelope sitting in the passenger seat like an unwanted passenger. I did not rage, nor did I call my brother Trevor, the chief executive officer of Senthora, who had undoubtedly authorized this execution to appease his new board members and secure his own position. Instead, I parked my car, walked into my apartment, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and retrieved my original employment contract from the metal filing cabinet in my closet. Sitting in my living room, the silence of my apartment felt heavy. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, a sharp contrast to the bustling activity of the laboratory I had left behind. I looked at the manila envelope on the table, unopened, containing the insulting package Gregory had handed me. They had assumed I would sign it. They assumed that a researcher, a doctor of philosophy with no business background, would be intimidated by their corporate threats and sign away my rights for 2 months of salary. But I knew the value of my work, and more importantly, I knew the law. I pulled the filing cabinet drawer open, the metal sliding with a sharp squeak. Under the folder labeled Legal Agreements was the original document. I turned the pages, reading every paragraph. I flipped past the boilerplate language until I found Section 9.3. It was a clause I had fought tooth and nail to insert during onboarding 5 years ago, back when the company was just 3 people in a rented warehouse and desperately needed my academic research to attract angel investors. My brother Trevor had complained about the legal fees back then, but he had signed it anyway because he had no choice. The clause read, "All research, methodologies, and patentable work shall remain the sole property of the originating party unless explicitly transferred in writing." I read the words 3 times, listening to the ice melt in my glass. There were no transfer documents. I knew this because I had never signed one. Every patent application we had filed over the last 5 years bore my name, Daniel Finch, as the sole inventor. There were 6 filings in total, covering our core technology, a viral vector system designed to deliver synthetic ribonucleic acid directly into tumor cells. And because my brother Trevor had been too busy chasing venture capitalists, and Gregory had been too busy reorganizing the corporate structure, they had never bothered to secure the intellectual property assignments. Under Title 35, United States Code, Section 261, any assignment of patent rights must be executed in writing. Without my signature on a transfer document, Senthora did not own a single strand of the technology they were currently marketing to the world. They had fired the creator, but they had left the keys to the kingdom in my filing cabinet. The next morning, I met with Evelyn Shore at a quiet diner near the university. She was an intellectual property litigator who was sharp, analytical, and had no patience for corporate posturing. I slid the contract and my patent documents across the table. Evelyn did not say a word for 10 minutes. She just drank her black coffee and scanned the pages, her pen marking key phrases. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mix of disbelief and professional delight. Evelyn Shore's office was located in a restored brick building near the Old Canal, a space filled with floor-to-soiling bookshelves containing leather-bound legal reporters. She did not operate like the corporate attorneys my brother hired. She did not have a glass desk or a minimalist reception area. Instead, she had stacks of case files, a massive oak desk, and a dry analytical mind that could dismantle a contract in seconds. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes focused on the words of Section 9.3. The diner where we met was loud, filled with students and professors shouting over the sound of frying bacon and clinking mugs. But our table was an island of quiet concentration. She explained the history of patent ownership under federal law, noting that while the company had funded the research, the lack of a written assignment was a fatal mistake. Under the law, specifically Title 35, United States Code, Section 261. A patent is a form of personal property, and any transfer of that property must be executed through a written instrument signed by the inventor. Without my signature, they were essentially building a mansion on a rented piece of land, and I was the landlord. This section 9.3 is airtight, Evelyn said, tapping her finger on the page. They fired you without securing the intellectual property assignments. In the eyes of the law, specifically Title 35, United States Code, Section 261, you are the sole owner of these patents. Synthera has no legal right to manufacture, sell, or even pitch this technology to outside investors. So what do? I asked. Do we file an injunction immediately? Evelyn leaned back, a calculating smile appearing on her face. No, if we sue them now, they will just scramble, pause their operations, and try to settle for a reasonable amount. We wait. They are preparing for their Series C funding round, correct? Yes, I replied. My former assistant told me they are trying to raise $40 million from a syndicate of major venture capital firms. Excellent, Evelyn said. Let them build their entire pitch on your technology. Let them tell the venture capital firms that they own the future of oncology therapeutics. The higher they climb, the more devastating the fall will be. We will let them walk straight to the edge of the cliff before we show them the drop. The 3 weeks that followed were an exercise in self-control. I would wake up early, make coffee, and sit at my computer, reading through the biotechnology forums and corporate announcements. I watched as Synthera's public relations team began rolling out the marketing campaign. They posted photographs of the laboratory, highlighting Gregory Vance standing next to our bioreactors, looking thoughtful as he pointed at computer screens displaying my cellular charts. It was a bizarre experience, watching someone else pretend to understand the nuances of a technology they had no part in creating. I saw their press releases detailing their upcoming presentation at Biotech Now West, where they claimed they would showcase a major advancement in targeted oncological therapeutics. Gregory was quoted as saying that the platform would redefine how we treat solid tumors, calling it a triumph of internal innovation. I saved every web page, every quote, and every document of their promotional materials, creating a digital folder of evidence that grew larger each day. Instead, I set up a burner email address and subscribed to every venture capital newsletter and industry blog in the biotechnology sector. I wanted to monitor Synthera from the outside. It did not take long for the first crumbs of information to appear. An industry newsletter published an article about an upcoming biotech conference in San Francisco. The piece hinted that Synthera was preparing to announce a massive technological breakthrough and close a $40 million funding round. The article featured a quote from Gregory Vance, who was described as the visionary director of innovation leading the project. He spoke at length about the company's proprietary cascade vector system, referring to it as the crown jewel of Synthera's research. I forwarded the article to Evelyn. Her reply was brief. Let them keep talking. Every public statement they make is another nail in their corporate coffin. Meanwhile, I received a secure message on my personal phone from Teresa Mendez, my former laboratory assistant. Teresa was a brilliant researcher who remained at the company after my departure. She told me that Gregory had completely restructured the lab, replacing my scientific protocols with simplified versions designed to look impressive to non-scientific visitors. Teresa's messages on Signal were a lifeline to the laboratory. She described how Gregory was running the facility like a television set. He had instructed the junior technicians to run dye solutions through the columns during investor visits because the colored liquids looked more impressive than the clear, purified vector solutions. He was focusing entirely on the aesthetics of science rather than the rigor of data. Teresa was deeply frustrated, as she was the one who had to handle the actual lab work while Gregory took the credit. She explained that Gregory had no idea how to handle a column chromatography run, once asking her why the protein peaks were not showing up on the monitor when he had forgotten to turn on the UV detector. It was clear that Gregory was out of his depth, relying entirely on my old slide decks and research notes to answer questions from the technical auditors. When she sent me the slides for the San Francisco presentation, I saw my own work, my own graphs, and my own diagrams rebranded with Gregory's name. It was the final validation we needed. He calls it the Vance Cascade model, Teresa wrote. He literally put his name on your slides, Daniel. They are presenting the deck at the Biotech Now West Conference on June 9th. I felt a cold surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. Gregory was not a scientist, he was a salesman. He did not understand the underlying biology of the vector, which meant he had no idea how fragile his position truly was. I instructed Teresa to send me a copy of the presentation's slides if she could access them without risking her job. 3 hours later, a secure file arrived in my inbox. I opened it and scrolled to slide 7. There it was, my dosage timeline, my experimental data, and my original vector diagrams. They had not even changed the color scheme of the charts. They had simply erased my name from the footer and replaced it with the company logo and Gregory's name. They were about to pitch my science to some of the largest investment funds in the country. They were charging ahead, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to dissolve. 2 weeks before the Biotech Now West conference, Evelyn Shore initiated our first move. She did not file a lawsuit, nor did she send a threatening letter to my brother Trevor. That would have given them time to react. Instead, she sent a single unmarked envelope to the senior partner at the law firm, handling the due diligence review for the investment syndicate. The law firm of Henderson and Cole represented the venture capital syndicate. Their due diligence teams were notorious for meticulous audits of corporate records, contracts, and filings. When Evelyn Shore sent the package, she knew exactly how they would react. They would not call Trevor or Synthora's general counsel immediately. They would first verify the filings with the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. They would see that the patents were registered solely to Dr. Daniel Finch, and then they would search their internal deal room for the corresponding assignment agreements. When they found a blank space where those documents should have been, the panic would begin, silent at first, but spreading rapidly through their legal department. Inside the envelope was a copy of my original employment agreement, with Section 9.3 highlighted, along with printouts of the 6 core patents from the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. There was no letter, no demand, and no explanation. There did not need to be. Due diligence attorneys are paid to find risks, and a potential ownership dispute over a company's entire technology platform is the ultimate red flag. The reaction was immediate, though silent. Behind the scenes, the audit team began cross-referencing the patents. They searched for the assignment documents that should have transferred the rights from Daniel Finch to Synthora. They searched the Federal Registry, they searched their internal folders, and they found absolutely nothing. A week later, Teresa messaged me again. She said the atmosphere in the office had turned frantic. The executive suite was locked, and the general counsel was seen running between meetings with a pale face. Gregory Vance had canceled his laboratory tours. Spending his days behind closed doors, the atmosphere inside Synthora was deteriorating by the hour. Teresa described how the general counsel, a man who usually spent his days playing golf and reviewing basic non-disclosure agreements, was now working late into the night. The cleaning staff found him asleep at his desk, surrounded by boxes of old corporate files from the company's early days in the warehouse. They were searching for any scrap of paper, any signed memo, or any email exchange that could be construed as a written assignment of intellectual property. But I knew they would find nothing. I had been extremely careful. Every time Trevor had asked me to sign a document, I had sent it to Evelyn first, and she had always advised me to refuse any general assignment clauses. Gregory Vance was also feeling the pressure. He had stopped giving his confident presentations to the laboratory staff, instead spending his time in closed-door meetings with the executive team, trying to understand how a startup could raise $40 million based on a technology they did not legally own. They are looking for something, Teresa wrote. The legal department is asking for copies of every document you signed when you joined the company. I smiled, remembering that day 5 years ago. Trevor had been so eager to sign the lease on the warehouse that he had barely looked at my contract amendments. He had simply scribbled his signature on the final page, assuming his brother would never challenge him. He had forgotten that business is not family. On the morning of June 7th, just 2 days before the conference, the panic peaked. My brother Trevor finally called me. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table, his name flashing on the screen. I did not answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. The voicemail my brother Trevor left was filled with a false, strained joviality that I had not heard in years. He spoke as if we were still co-founders working out of that cold warehouse, sharing a pizza and talking about our dreams. He claimed that the legal team had found a minor administrative issue that needed a simple signature to clean up before the San Francisco presentation. He said it was just a technical formality, something the investors wanted to see to tick a box. But I knew better. The retroactive assignment form he wanted me to sign would have transferred all my rights to Synthora for no compensation, effectively stripping me of my leverage. When Evelyn Shore's formal cease and desist letter arrived at the General Counsel's office, the response was a flurry of emails and phone calls. The letter cited Title 35, United States Code, Section 271, and warned of massive statutory damages for willful infringement if they proceeded with the public presentation of the platform. I forwarded the text to Evelyn. "Do not reply," Evelyn instructed. "I will handle the communication now. We have them exactly where we want them." That afternoon, Evelyn sent a formal letter to Synthora's general counsel, copying the board of directors and the lead investors of the syndicate. The letter stated that Dr. Daniel Finch was the sole owner of the intellectual property currently being marketed under the name Vance Cascade Model. It cited Title 35, United States Code, Section 271, warning that any public demonstration or commercial sale of the technology would constitute willful patent infringement. The letter also noted that the company's chief executive officer, Trevor Finch, had failed to secure the necessary intellectual property rights, representing a severe breach of fiduciary duty to the company's shareholders. The hammer had dropped. The company had spent months preparing for their $40 million funding round, and now they were facing a legal roadblock that could destroy their valuation overnight. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning. On June 8th, the day before the San Francisco conference, I dialed into the conference call from Evelyn's office, my microphone muted and my camera turned off. Evelyn sat beside me, a physical binder containing all our documentation open on the desks. The conference room in Evelyn's office was quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic from the street below. We sat at a long glass table, a speakerphone in the center, and the physical binders containing our evidence stacked neatly in front of us. I looked out the window, watching the morning fog roll over the bay, feeling a strange sense of peace. I had spent years in dark laboratories, focused on the microscopic behavior of cells and proteins, and now my entire career was being decided in a corporate conference call. When the call connected, the background noise was a mix of nervous rustling, throat clearing, and the sterile chimes of participants joining the virtual room. Trevor was the first to speak, trying to project his usual confidence, but the tremor in his voice was unmistakable. He was speaking from a hotel room in Europe, where he'd been vacationing, completely unaware that his company was collapsing in his absence. Suzanne Miller opened the meeting with a cold, professional tone. "We are here to address a critical issue regarding the ownership of our primary technology platform. Our due diligence team has flagged a significant discrepancy in this patent assignments. Trevor, please explain the situation." Trevor cleared his throat, his voice sounding thin and strained. "Susan, this is simply an administrative oversight. Daniel is my brother and we co-founded this company together. The lack of a formal assignment document is a minor detail that we can easily correct with a retroactive agreement. Gregory has been managing the technology transition, and we are prepared to offer Daniel a generous compensation package to resolve this." Evelyn Shore unmuted her microphone. "Let us be clear," she said, her voice cutting through the excuses. "This is not an administrative oversight. This is a fundamental failure of corporate governance. Under Section 9.3 of Dr. Finch's employment contract, which was signed by Trevor Finch 5 years ago, all patentable work remains his property. No transfer was ever executed." The general counsel joined the call, his voice trembling slightly. "We believe the company has an equitable claim to the intellectual property based on the resources provided to Dr. Finch during his employment. The General Counsel's attempt to argue for an equitable claim was a desperate legal maneuver that Evelyn Shore dismantled in seconds. She explained that under federal patent law, specifically Title 35, United States Code, Section 261, assignments must be in writing to be legally binding. She cited several landmark cases where companies had lost the rights to their core technologies because they had relied on general employment agreements or verbal understandings instead of explicit written assignments. The investor representatives on the call listened in silence, their silence representing the slow death of Cynthora's funding round. They were sophisticated investors who understood that a patent dispute of this magnitude would lead to years of expensive litigation, preventing the company from ever commercializing the technology. Gregory Vance's attempt to defend his role only highlighted his lack of understanding, as he claimed that the platform was a product of collective innovation, ignoring the legal reality of sole inventorship. An equitable claim is not a registered assignment, Evelyn responded instantly. Under federal law, patent assignments must be in writing. Dr. Finch has 6 registered patents in his name. If Cynthora attempts to present this technology at the conference tomorrow, we will immediately file for an emergency injunction. We will also notify the securities regulators of potential fraud. As you are pitching technology you do not own to secure $40 million in capital. The room went completely silent. I could hear the faint sound of typing from one of the investor representatives. Gregory Vance finally spoke, his voice defensive. We cannot cancel the presentation. The slides are already loaded and the investors are expecting us. Daniel was just a lab manager. I am the one who structured this into a marketable platform. The board chair, Susan Miller, was a veteran of the biotechnology industry who had no patience for Trevor's excuses or Gregory's corporate jargon. She demanded a direct, unqualified answer from the General Counsel, who had no choice but to admit the truth. The realization that they did not own the technology they had been promoting to the market for 3 years was a devastating blow. The $40 million funding round, which was supposed to secure the company's future and fund their Phase 2 clinical trials, was now on hold. The investors were clear. They would not proceed with a company that did not own its intellectual property. They gave the board a 24-hour deadline to reach a licensing agreement with me, warning that if the dispute was not resolved, they would withdraw their commitments and consider legal action for misrepresentation. Gregory, shut up, Susan Miller snapped. The board chair had no interest in Gregory's marketing terms. She turned her attention to the General Counsel. Is this correct? Does Dr. Finch own the foundational patents? The General Counsel hesitated, then spoke the words that ended their defense. Yes. Without his signature on the assignment documents, we do not own the intellectual property. At that moment, Trevor's microphone clicked on. He spoke in a whisper, forgetting that his line was still active. He owns every patent we have been pitching for 3 years. I unmuted my microphone for the first time. You wanted efficiency, Gregory, I said, my voice steady. You told me I was replaced on day 1, but you forgot that you cannot replace the science. You have been selling my work under your name, and now the bill is due. The lead investor representative cleared his throat. Under these circumstances, our firm is halting all funding commitments until a formal licensing agreement is executed between Cynthora and Dr. Finch. If this is not resolved by the end of the day, we are pulling out of the Series C round entirely. The meeting adjourned in chaos. The board had 24 hours to save their company, and I held the only pen that could write their survival. The negotiations took place over the next 12 hours. Cynthora's legal team sent 3 separate proposals, each one offering a higher salary and a grander title to entice me back to the company. They offered to make me the chief scientific officer and fire Gregory Vance immediately. I rejected every offer. I had no interest in returning to a company run by my brother, nor did I want to be a cog in their corporate machine again. I wanted independence, and I wanted control. Evelyn and I drafted our own terms. We did not ask for employment. Instead, we demanded a non-exclusive licensing agreement. Cynthora would be granted the right to use the viral delivery vector for their current clinical trials, but they would pay my new consulting firm, Finch Bioworks, a substantial annual licensing fee. The negotiation process was a grueling marathon of legal drafting, with emails flying back and forth between Evelyn Shore's office and Synthora's external counsel. They tried to offer me a seat on the board of directors, a massive block of stock options, and the title of Chief Scientific Officer, hoping that I would agree to assign the patents in exchange for corporate prestige. But I had seen how they treated their employees, and I had no interest in returning to the corporate structure. We insisted on a licensing structure that would protect my rights while allowing Synthora to proceed with their clinical trials. The financial terms were substantial: a $3 million upfront payment, a royalty rate of 8% of all future gross revenues derived from the vector, and an annual licensing fee of $500,000. We also included a clause that required Synthora to submit quarterly reports detailing their research progress and allowing my firm to audit their laboratory records to ensure compliance. Additionally, the agreement stipulated that any derivative technology developed by Synthora using my vector must be reviewed by my firm, and I would retain a percentage of ownership in any new patents they filed. Finally, all public materials, investor decks, and scientific publications must explicitly credit the technology as the Finch protocol. At 5 in the afternoon, the board capitulated. Trevor signed the agreement on behalf of the company, and the investors finalized their funding commitments. The Series C round was saved, but the valuation of the company was now permanently tied to my licensing terms. The next morning, the Biotech Now West conference proceeded as scheduled. Gregory Vance did not present. Instead, a senior researcher read a modified script that focused on the collaborative development of the platform, explicitly mentioning Dr. Daniel Finch and the licensing agreement with Finch Bioworks. 2 days later, Teresa Mendez sent me a screenshot of an internal company announcement. Gregory Vance was no longer employed by Synthora, effective immediately. His standing desk had been packed into a cardboard box, and he had been escorted from the building by the same security guard who had buzzed me out weeks prior. The aftermath of the conference was a quiet victory. Gregory Vance's departure was announced as a decision to pursue other opportunities. The office was quiet as he packed his personal items into a single cardboard box. The junior researchers felt a sense of relief. My brother Trevor's attempt to contact me was a reminder of the personal cost of this dispute. He wanted to meet for dinner, to talk as siblings rather than business adversaries. But the damage had been done. He had co-authored my termination, and I could no longer trust him. I referred him to my legal counsel, establishing a professional boundary that would protect me from further betrayal. My brother Trevor sent me a personal message a week later, asking if we could meet for dinner to move past the business dispute. I did not reply. I forwarded the message to Evelyn, who reminded him that all communications regarding Synthora's operations must go through counsel. Today, Finch Bioworks operates from a modern, sunlit space in a research park overlooking the city. We have a state-of-the-art laboratory, equipped with the latest centrifuges, analyzers, and tissue culture rooms. Teresa Mendez is my lead researcher, and she has thrived in an environment that prioritizes scientific rigor over marketing buzzwords. We are currently developing a second-generation delivery system, one that we own entirely without any corporate partners. Synthora continues to send their quarterly reports for my review. Every 3 months, I sit at my desk, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, and read through their data. They are working hard, paying their licensing fees on time, and making sure my name is spelled correctly on every document. They thought they could fire me and take my work. But in the end, they did not replace me. They just became my most profitable customer.